The October sun cast long shadows across Fort Bragg's training field as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the unmarked sedan. At 42, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her graying brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun. The scars on her hands told stories she rarely shared. She wasn't supposed to be here. After 20 years in military intelligence, most of it classified, Sarah had retired to a quiet life in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She taught history at the community college and volunteered at the Veterans Center. The nightmares had finally started to fade. But yesterday a phone call changed everything. A voice from her past, urgent and worried. "We need you, Mitchell, one more time." Now she stood at the edge of a NATO joint training exercise, watching over 300 soldiers from 6 different countries running drills. She'd been told to observe, nothing more. Look for anything unusual. The intelligence community had picked up chatter about a security breach, and Sarah's expertise in Eastern European operations made her the logical choice. "Can I help you, ma'am?" A young captain approached, his tone polite but dismissive. He barely glanced at her uniform, focusing instead on his clipboard. "I'm here to observe the exercises," Sarah said simply. The captain's eyes finally lifted. He took in her age, the fact that she wore no unit insignia, no rank visible on her civilian-style jacket. His expression shifted to barely concealed annoyance. "This is a restricted area. If you're with the press, you need to go through public affairs." Sarah pulled out her credentials. The captain studied them, his frown deepening. "Lieutenant Colonel, I don't see you on the roster, and frankly, ma'am, we don't need observers slowing down the operation." Before Sarah could respond, 3 more officers joined them. Major Tom Hendricks led the group, a career officer known for running tight operations and tolerating no interference. "What's the problem, Captain?" Hendricks asked. "This woman claims she's here to observe, sir. Says she's a lieutenant colonel, but I've never seen her before." Hendricks looked Sarah up and down. She saw the judgment in his eyes, the same look she'd encountered countless times in her career. Too old, too female, too much of an outsider. "Ma'am, I don't know who sent you or what strings you pulled, but this is a serious operation. We can't have tourists wandering around asking questions." "I'm not a tourist, Major. I was asked to be here by someone who doesn't understand how field operations work," Hendricks interrupted. "Look, I'm sure you had a nice career behind a desk somewhere, but this is real training. These soldiers are preparing for real missions. We don't have time to babysit." The other officers chuckled. Sarah felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "I understand, Major. I'll stay out of your way. I'm just here to watch." "You do that," Hendricks said, already turning away. "Captain, make sure she stays behind the observation line, way behind it." Sarah spent the next 2 hours standing alone at the edge of the field, ignored by everyone except the occasional curious glance. She watched the exercises with a trained eye, noting the precision of the movements, the coordination between units. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. During a break, she moved closer to the communications tent. A sergeant spotted her and immediately stepped into her path. "Ma'am, this area is off limits." "I just want to—" Major Hendricks was clear. "Observers stay back." More soldiers gathered, watching the exchange. Sarah heard the whispers. "Who is she?" Some retired officer trying to relive her glory days. "Probably never saw real action. Desk jockey." Someone's aunt pulled strings to get her a base tour. The laughter cut deeper than Sarah wanted to admit. She'd faced worse, survived worse, but something about being dismissed so completely made her feel invisible. She retreated to her observation point, taking out binoculars to watch the far end of the field. That's when she noticed him, a communications specialist working alone, his movements slightly off. He kept glancing toward the tree line, his fingers moving across his equipment in patterns that seemed wrong. Sarah's instincts, honed by 2 decades of intelligence work, kicked in. She pulled out her phone and snapped several photos, zooming in on the soldier's hands, his equipment, the direction of his gaze. "Ma'am, no photographs." A lieutenant appeared at her elbow. "Those are the rules." "I'm authorized." "Not according to Major Hendricks. He's requesting that you leave the training area. Now." Sarah looked past the lieutenant toward the communications specialist. He disappeared into the tent. "I need to speak with the commanding officer," Sarah said firmly. "Major Hendricks is the commanding officer of this exercise, and he's made his decision. You need to leave, or I'll have to escort you out." The crowd of soldiers had grown larger. Sarah saw smirks, eye rolls, heard someone mutter, "Crazy lady." She had 2 choices: make a scene and lose any chance of investigating further, or leave quietly and find another way. "I'll go," she said quietly. As she walked back to her car, she heard Major Hendricks' voice carry across the field. "That's what happens when we let every retired officer with connections wander onto an active training site. Next, she'll be writing a complaint about how we hurt her feelings." The laughter followed Sarah all the way to her vehicle. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. The old Sarah, the one who'd spent 3 years undercover in Budapest, who'd run operations across the Balkans, who'd earned her rank through blood and sacrifice, wanted to march back there and tell them exactly who she was. But that was the problem. She couldn't tell them. Her service record was classified. Her missions, her commendations, her sacrifices, all buried under layers of secrecy necessary to protect operations and operatives still in the field. To these soldiers, she was nobody. Just an older woman in an outdated uniform, probably chasing past glory. Sarah started the car but didn't drive away. Instead, she pulled up the photos on her phone and began analyzing what she'd seen. The communications specialist's hand movements, the way he'd positioned his equipment, the angle of the antenna. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the pattern. It was a technique used by foreign intelligence services to piggyback communications on NATO frequencies. Someone was feeding information out of this exercise in real time. She reached for her phone to call her contact, but hesitated. If she reported this now, based on what? A few suspicious observations from someone who'd just been thrown off the base. Hendricks would dismiss it as the paranoid delusions of a washed-up officer. No, she needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began cross-referencing the communications specialist's identity. Within minutes, she had a name. Corporal David Chen, communications expert, exemplary record, assigned to this unit for 6 months. She dug deeper, using access codes she technically shouldn't still have. Chen's background was clean, too clean. No social media presence before 3 years ago. No educational records before his community college transcripts. It was a good cover, but Sarah had seen hundreds of covers in her career. She knew the signs. Her phone buzzed. A text from Major Hendricks. "Your security clearance for base access has been revoked pending review of your authorization. Do not attempt to return." Sarah smiled grimly. They had no idea what they'd just done. By trying to silence her, they'd proven she was onto something. Why else revoke her access so quickly? She drove to a coffee shop outside the base and set up her laptop. For the next 3 hours, she worked, building a profile on Chen and cross-referencing the NATO exercise schedule with intelligence reports from the past 6 months. The pattern emerged slowly. Every time Chen's unit participated in a joint exercise, there were subsequent security incidents. Nothing major: leaked training schedules, compromised communication frequencies, minor breaches that could be explained away. But together, they told a story of systematic intelligence gathering. By the time the sun set, Sarah had enough to make a case. But she needed someone who would listen, someone who outranked Hendricks and had the authority to act. She pulled up her contact list and stared at a name she hadn't called in 5 years. Commander James Ghost Morrison, Navy SEAL, now overseeing Special Operations Coordination at JSOC. They'd worked together in Croatia, and he was one of the few people who knew what she'd really done during her classified years. Her finger hovered over the call button. Once she made this call, there was no going back. She'd be dragging herself back into a world she'd worked hard to leave behind. Sarah thought about those soldiers laughing at her, about Major Hendricks' dismissive smirk, about being treated like she was nothing. Then she thought about what would happen if Chen wasn't stopped, about the soldiers who would be put at risk by compromised intelligence, about the lives that could be lost because someone was feeding NATO operations to foreign powers. She made the call. "Mitchell," Ghost's voice was surprised but warm. "It's been a long time." "I need your help," Sarah said. "And I need you to trust me because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy." Commander James Morrison listened without interrupting as Sarah laid out everything she'd observed. When she finished, there was a long silence on the line. "You always did have a nose for this stuff, Mitchell," he finally said. "But you know how this looks, right? A retired intelligence officer with no official standing, kicked off a base, making accusations against a decorated communications specialist." "I know, Ghost. That's why I called you. I need someone with the authority to investigate this properly." "And you think that's me?" "You're coordinating the NATO exercises from JSOC. You have oversight authority, and you know I'm not some paranoid desk jockey seeing shadows." Another pause. Sarah could almost hear him thinking, weighing the risks of believing her against the risks of ignoring a potential security breach. "What do you need?" he asked. Relief flooded through her. "Access. I need to get back on that base and observe Chen without Hendricks interfering. And I need technical support, someone who can monitor the communications equipment without tipping anyone off." "That's a tall order. Hendricks will push back hard. He's already filed a complaint about you disrupting his operation." "Of course he has." Sarah wasn't surprised. Men like Hendricks protected their territory fiercely, especially from anyone they perceived as a threat to their authority. "Give me 24 hours, Ghost said. "I'll see what I can arrange. But Mitchell, if you're wrong about this, it's both our careers on the line." "I'm not wrong." Sarah spent the next day preparing. She reviewed everything she knew about modern intelligence gathering techniques, studied the layout of Fort Bragg's training facilities, and built a comprehensive profile of Corporal Chen. What she found made her more certain. Chen had appeared in the military system 3 years ago with a manufactured background, good enough to pass standard screening, but not good enough to fool someone with Sarah's experience. His handler had been skilled, but not perfect. The question was who he was working for. The techniques suggested Eastern European intelligence services, but the sophistication pointed to someone with serious resources. Russia, China, or a smaller player trying to look bigger. That evening, Ghost called back. "You're in. I've arranged for you to return as a special security consultant assigned directly to my office. You'll have full access to the training exercises and authorization to conduct security reviews. Hendricks is going to be furious, but he can't refuse a direct order from JSOC." "Thank you, Ghost." "Don't thank me yet. I'm also sending Master Sergeant Kelly Rodriguez with you. She's one of our best communications intelligence specialists. Between you two, if there's something to find, you'll find it. But Sarah, if this turns out to be nothing, it's on me. So please tell me you're sure." Sarah thought about what she'd observed, about the patterns she'd seen, about her instincts that had kept her alive through years of dangerous operations. "I'm sure." The next morning, Sarah returned to Fort Bragg with Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how good she was at her job. "Commander Morrison speaks highly of you, ma'am," Rodriguez said as they drove onto the base. "Says you're the best intelligence analyst he's ever worked with." "He's being generous." He also said you once identified a Serbian assassin in a crowd of 3,000 people based on how he was standing. That true?" Sarah smiled slightly. "The way people hold themselves tells you everything about their training. Assassins stand differently than civilians. They're always watching, always calculating angles and exits." "That's what I'll be looking for today. Commander Morrison briefed me on Corporal Chen. I've already started monitoring the communications frequencies. If he's piggybacking signals, I'll catch it." They arrived at the training field to find Major Hendricks waiting, his face red with anger. "This is unacceptable," he said before Sarah could even get out of the car. "I run a tight operation here, and I will not have it disrupted by some." "Somewhat, Major?" Sarah asked quietly as she stepped out. This time, her credentials came with a letter from JSOC on official letterhead, signed by a 3-star general. Hendricks snatched the letter and read it, his jaw working. "Security consultant. This is a waste of resources. There is no security threat in my operation." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Rodriguez said pleasantly. "We'll just observe, verify everything is secure, and be out of your way. My communications specialists are vetted, every single one. I personally approved their clearances." "I'm sure you did, sir," Sarah said, "and we're just here to provide an additional layer of review, standard procedure for NATO joint exercises." It wasn't standard procedure, and they all knew it. But the letter gave Sarah and Rodriguez authority that even Hendricks couldn't challenge without making it a much bigger issue than he wanted. "Fine," Hendricks said tightly, "but stay out of the way of my soldiers. We have a schedule to keep." Over the next 3 days, Sarah and Rodriguez worked quietly, blending into the background of the massive training exercise. Rodriguez set up monitoring equipment disguised as standard communications gear, tracking every signal going in and out of the base. Sarah watched Chen. He was good, very good. He went through his duties professionally, interacted normally with other soldiers, showed no obvious signs of stress or deception. But Sarah had spent years reading people, and she saw the tiny tells. The way his eyes tracked certain officers, the micro-expressions when specific topics came up, the slight tension in his shoulders when he worked alone. On the 3rd day, during a complex multi-unit coordination exercise, Rodriguez caught something. "Ma'am, I've got an anomalous signal," she said quietly, showing Sarah her laptop screen. "It's using the NATO frequency but with a data packet structure that doesn't match our protocols. It's brief, less than 3 seconds, but it's there." "Source: Communications Tent 3, that's Chen's station." Sarah's heart rate picked up. "Can you trace where it's going?" "Working on it. The routing is sophisticated, bouncing through multiple relays, but I should have something in the next few hours." They had their proof, but proof wasn't enough. They needed to catch Chen in the act and identify his handler. "Keep monitoring," Sarah said. "I'm going to get closer." She made her way toward Communications Tent 3, moving casually as if on a general inspection. Chen was at his station, focused on his screens. As Sarah approached, he glanced up, and for just a fraction of a second something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, fear. It was gone too quickly to identify. "Corporal Chen," Sarah said pleasantly, "how are the communications running today?" "Perfectly, ma'am, no issues." "Good, I'm just doing routine checks. Mind if I take a look at your equipment logs?" She saw it then, the tightening of his hand on the keyboard, the slight shift in his posture. He was preparing to run. "Of course, ma'am, just let me pull them up." His fingers moved across the keyboard. To anyone else, it would look like normal work, but Sarah recognized the pattern from her years in intelligence. He was sending a distress signal to his handler. "Actually, Corporal, step away from the keyboard, please." Chen froze. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw the calculation happening. He was younger, stronger, probably had training in hand-to-hand combat. She was a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd spent the last decade behind a desk. He made his choice. Chen's hand shot toward something under his desk, probably a weapon or a device to destroy evidence. But Sarah had been expecting it. Years of training kicked in, muscle memory that hadn't faded despite her retirement. She moved faster than Chen expected, striking his wrist with enough force to deflect his hand away from whatever he was reaching for. At the same time, she swept his legs out from under him with a technique she'd learned from a Russian defector 20 years ago. Chen hit the ground hard, and before he could recover, Sarah had his arm twisted behind his back in a control hold. "Security," she called out. "I need security at Communications Tent 3. Soldiers came running, hundreds among them. They stopped short at the scene, the older woman they'd been mocking 3 days ago, holding a communications specialist face down on the ground. "What the hell is going on?" Hundrux demanded. "Corporal Chun has been transmitting classified information off base," Sarah said calmly, maintaining her hold. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez has the proof. I need him secured and his equipment isolated immediately." "This is insane," Hundrux said. "Chun is one of my best soldiers. Let him up right now." "Sir, I can confirm Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's assessment," Rodriguez said, arriving with her laptop. "I have clear evidence of unauthorized transmissions using NATO frequencies. The signals are encrypted and routed to an external receiver approximately 30 miles from this location." Hundrux's face went pale. He looked from Rodriguez to Chun to Sarah. "Chun?" he asked, his voice uncertain for the first time. The corporal said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "Get him up," Hundrux ordered 2 sergeants. "Take him to the security office. No one speaks to him until Jag arrives." As Chun was led away, Hundrux turned to Sarah. The arrogance was gone, replaced by shock and something that might have been embarrassment. "How did you know?" "Experience," Sarah said simply. "I've been doing this for a long time, Major." I owe you an apology." "You owe me more than that. You owe me basic respect, but we can discuss that later. Right now, we need to identify Chun's handler before they realize he's been compromised and disappear." Rodriguez was already working. "I've got the receiver location narrowed down. It's a mobile unit, probably in a vehicle. I can track the movement pattern." "Get a tactical team ready," Sarah told Hundrux. "We need to move fast." For the first time since she'd arrived, Hundrux looked at her with something approaching respect. "What do you need?" Part 3, The Handler. The tactical briefing room buzzed with controlled energy. Sarah stood at the front, a digital map projected behind her showing the tracking data Rodriguez had collected. "The receiver has been moving in a consistent pattern," Sarah explained to the assembled team of military police and intelligence specialists. 30 miles north, always within range of the base communications but far enough away to avoid casual detection. Based on the movement pattern, we believe the operator is using a modified surveillance van, staying mobile to avoid being traced. Commander Murison had arrived by helicopter an hour earlier. He stood at the back of the room, watching Sarah work with a slight smile. This was the Mitchell he remembered, confident, precise, commanding respect through sheer competence. Major Hundrux sat in the front row, notably quiet. The reality of how badly he'd misjudged the situation was clearly weighing on him. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez will continue monitoring the signals," Sarah continued. "The moment we move on Chun's handler, he'll likely try to establish contact to warn them or receive emergency instructions. When he does, we'll have confirmation of the location." "What if he doesn't take the bait?" asked Captain Williams. the military police officer who would lead the apprehension team. He will, Sarah said with certainty. Chun's been in place for 3 years. That represents a massive investment of time and resources. His handler won't abandon him without at least attempting communication. And if the handler runs, Williams asked. That's why we'll have 3 intercept teams positioned along the likely escape routes. Rodriguez's tracking will give us real-time location updates. They won't get far. Ghost stepped forward. One more thing, everyone. The intelligence community has confirmed that Chun's fingerprints and DNA match a Chinese intelligence operative named David Zheng who disappeared from radar 4 years ago. This is not amateur hour. His handler will be equally professional. Expect resistance. A ripple of tension went through the room. This had just escalated from a security breach to potential international espionage. Rules of engagement, Williams asked. Detain if possible, Ghost said, but protect yourselves. These people have already proven they're willing to embed deep cover operatives in our military. They won't surrender easily. The briefing broke up, and teams moved to their positions. Sarah found herself alone with Ghost and Hundrux. I was wrong about you, Hundrux said without preamble. I made assumptions based on things that had nothing to do with your actual capabilities. I'm sorry. Sarah studied him for a moment. The apology seemed genuine, but it didn't erase the disrespect or the laughter from the other soldiers. Major, do you know why you didn't recognize my name when I arrived? She asked. No, ma'am. Because my entire service record is classified. 20 years in military intelligence, most of it undercover. I've run operations in 17 countries. I speak 6 languages. I've been shot twice, nearly died from poisoning once, and spent 3 months in a Serbian prison that officially doesn't exist. Sarah's voice was calm, almost conversational. And none of that matters when I show up looking like someone's aunt who probably never left a desk. Hundrux had the grace to look ashamed. The problem, Major, isn't that you didn't know my record. It's that you assumed I didn't have one. You assumed that because I'm a woman over 40, I must not have earned my rank, that I must have pulled strings or ridden coattails. You never once considered that maybe, just maybe, I knew exactly what I was doing. You're right, Hundrux said quietly. And it's not an excuse, but I see it now. I see how I treated you, how the soldiers treated you, and I'm ashamed. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't, Ghost said, his voice carrying an edge of command. Because word is going to spread about what Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell did here. And the next time someone with her credentials shows up, I expect them to be treated with the respect they've earned. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. Ma'am, Chun's getting agitated. He's asking to speak to his commander. I think he's about to make contact. Sarah turned to Hundrux. Can you go down there? Let him think he's going to get leniency in exchange for cooperation. It might push him to reach out to his handler. Hundrux nodded and left. Sarah and Ghost moved to the monitoring room where Rodriguez had set up her equipment. All teams in position, Rodriguez reported. I've got eyes on the probable vehicle, a white panel van that's been circling the same 10-mile radius for the past hour, 2 occupants visible. On the screen, they could see multiple tracking markers, representing the intercept teams positioned along major roads and highways. Now we wait, Sarah said. It didn't take long. 15 minutes after Hundrux entered Chun's holding cell, Rodriguez's equipment lit up. Signal he's transmitting, it's encrypted, but the receiver is responding. The van is moving, heading north on Highway 87, speed increasing. All teams, target is moving north on 87, Ghost spoke into his radio. Intercept teams 2 and 3, prepare to engage. Sarah watched the screen as the markers converged. The van was moving fast, weaving through traffic. Whoever was driving knew they'd been compromised. They're good, Rodriguez muttered. Changing speeds, taking random turns, Professional evasion tactics. Team 3 has visual, a voice crackled over the radio. White panel van license plate matches, 2 occupants. They're aware of us and accelerating. Stay with them but keep distance, Ghost ordered. Don't spook them into doing something desperate in civilian traffic. The chase continued for 20 minutes, the van leading pursuers on a winding route through back roads. Then Rodriguez's board lit up with a new alert. They're transmitting again, she said. Burst transmission, high encryption. They're sending data somewhere. They're dumping their intelligence, Sarah said. Everything they've collected. They know they're about to be caught, so they're making sure the information gets out. Can you block it? Ghost asked Rodriguez. Already on it, but it's going to multiple receivers. I can jam some, but not all. On the screen, the van suddenly veered off-road, heading into a wooded area. They're running, the team leader reported. Going off-road, we're in pursuit. Ghost grabbed his jacket. I'm heading out there. Mitchell, you coming? Sarah didn't hesitate. Absolutely. They took a helicopter, arriving at the scene 20 minutes later. The van had been abandoned in a clearing, its doors open, equipment still running inside. Teams were spreading out through the woods, searching. Sarah approached the van carefully. Inside, she found sophisticated communications equipment, hard drives in the process of being wiped, and documents scattered across the floor in a hasty evacuation. They can't have gotten far on foot, Ghost said, joining her. The perimeter is tight. But Sarah was looking at the tree line, her instincts prickling. Something felt wrong. Ghost, this is too easy. They had to know we'd have air support. You don't run into the woods when helicopters are tracking you unless. The explosion cut her off. A fireball erupted from the far side of the clearing, followed by the sound of an engine roaring to life. Second vehicle, someone shouted. They had a second vehicle hidden. An old pickup truck burst from the trees, crashing through undergrowth. It had been concealed, probably for days, waiting for exactly this scenario. All units, new target. Ghost was on his radio instantly. But Sarah was already running toward the nearest vehicle. Come on. They gave chase, joined by 2 military police cruisers. The pickup was fast despite its age, modified for performance. It tore down dirt roads, kicking up clouds of dust. Sarah's driver was good, keeping pace despite the rough terrain. They were gaining when the pickup suddenly skidded to a stop. 2 figures jumped out and started running in different directions. Split up, Ghost ordered. Williams, take the one going east. Mitchell and I will take the other. Sarah and Ghost pursued on foot, crashing through underbrush. The figure ahead was fast and agile, but Sarah had spent years training for exactly this kind of pursuit. She knew how to read terrain, how to anticipate movements. They cornered their target at a rocky outcrop overlooking a steep ravine. The person turned and Sarah got her first clear look. A woman in her 40s, Asian, fit and clearly trained. She held a pistol, but her hands were shaking slightly. There's nowhere to go, Ghost said, his own weapon drawn but pointed down. We have the area surrounded. Put the gun down. The woman's eyes darted between them, calculating odds. Sarah could see her considering the jump into the ravine, probably survivable, but not without injury. You're Zhang's handler, Sarah said calmly. You've been running him for 3 years. That's a long time. You must have built quite a collection of intelligence. The woman's eyes focused on Sarah. You're the one who caught him, the old woman they were all laughing at. That's me. A bitter smile crossed the handler's face. They always underestimate it's useful. Yes, it is, Sarah agreed. I've used it myself, but it's over now. Whatever you transmitted has already been intercepted and traced. Your network is compromised. You can either surrender or you can jump and spend the next 6 months in a hospital before you end up in the same prison anyway. The handler's gun hand lowered slightly. You know what they'll do to me. I know you'll have a chance to tell your story, to maybe make a deal. but only if you're alive and cooperative." For a long moment they stood in silence, the only sound the wind in the trees and the distant calls of the search teams. Finally, the woman set her gun on the ground and raised her hands. "Wise choice," Ghost said, moving forward to secure her. As they walked back through the woods, the handler spoke quietly to Sarah. "How did you know about Zhang, about the transmissions?" "I've been doing this a long time," Sarah said, "and I've learned that the things people dismiss, the quiet observers, the older women, the ones who don't look like warriors, those are often the most dangerous." The handler actually laughed. "Yes, yes, they are." Part 4, The Revelation. The interrogation room at Fort Bragg's Intelligence Center was deliberately cold and uncomfortable. Sarah sat across from Zhang's handler, whose real name had been confirmed as Li Mei Chen, a senior operative for Chinese military intelligence. 2 days had passed since the arrest. Chen and Li had been processed, charged, and were now facing decades in federal prison for espionage. But Sarah knew there was more to the story. There always was. Ghost stood in the observation room with representatives from the FBI, CIA, and military intelligence. They'd been questioning Li for hours with little success. She was trained to resist interrogation, providing only basic information confirmed by her documentation. "Let me try," Sarah had said. The FBI agent had been skeptical. "She's stonewalling everyone. What makes you think you'll do better?" "Because I'm not going to interrogate her. I'm going to talk to her." Now, sitting across from Li, Sarah pushed a cup of hot tea across the table. "It's good tea," she said. "Not the cheap stuff from the break room. I had someone bring it from a real tea shop in town." Li looked at the cup suspiciously, but didn't touch it. "I'm not here to play good cop," Sarah continued. "You're going to prison, that's not negotiable, but how long and under what conditions, that's still open for discussion. I want a lawyer." "You have a lawyer. He's advised you not to say anything. Smart advice, legally speaking." Sarah took a sip of her own tea. "But sometimes legal advice doesn't account for the full picture of your life." Li's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Sarah pulled out a folder and opened it carefully. "It means I've spent the last 2 days learning about you. The real you, not just your intelligence file." She slid a photograph across the table. It showed a young woman receiving a university degree. Li Mei Chen graduated top of your class from Beijing Foreign Studies University, specialized in American culture and language. You could have done anything, teaching, diplomacy, business, but you chose intelligence work. Why? Li stared at the photo but said nothing. Sarah continued, sliding more photographs. "Your father was a professor. Your mother was a doctor, both well respected. Both dead now. Your father from a heart attack 5 years ago, your mother from cancer 2 years later. You have a younger brother who works as an engineer in Shanghai. He's married with 2 children." Li's hand moved involuntarily toward one of the photos showing her brother's family, then stopped. "Here's what I know," Sarah said softly. "You weren't born into intelligence work. You weren't raised to be a spy. You chose it probably out of a sense of patriotism, a desire to serve your country. There's no shame in that. I did the same thing." "We are not the same," Li said. "Aren't we?" Sarah met her eyes. "We both spent years undercover. We both sacrificed normal lives for our missions. We both know what it's like to be underestimated because we don't fit the image of what a spy should look like." She paused. "We both know what it's like to be alone." Something flickered in Li's expression. "The difference is," Sarah continued, "I eventually got to retire. I got to go home, teach history, have a life outside the shadows. But you've been running Zhang for 3 years. Before that, how many other operations? How many years have you spent pretending to be someone you're not?" Li's jaw tightened. "I do my duty." "I'm sure you do. And when you go to prison, your government will probably give you a medal in absentia. They'll call you a hero. But they won't get you out. They won't acknowledge you. You'll grow old in an American prison, and your brother's children will grow up never knowing their aunt. You're trying to manipulate me. Yes, Sarah admitted, but that doesn't make it less true. She pulled out another document. Here's what we've recovered so far from your transmissions: training schedules, communication protocols, tactical assessments. Valuable intelligence, certainly. But here's the interesting part. We found something else in Zhang's encrypted files. He was running a side operation you didn't know about. Li's eyes widened slightly. That's not possible. He was being recruited by Russian intelligence. They'd made contact 6 months ago and were offering to pay him directly for information, cutting out the Chinese middleman entirely. He was playing both sides. Sarah could see Li processing this, anger and betrayal crossing her face. Your government invested years in placing Zhang, and he was preparing to sell you out for a better offer. You sacrificed everything to run this operation, and your asset was getting ready to betray you. Why are you telling me this? Li asked. Because I want you to understand something. The people you work for, the people you've sacrificed for, they don't value you the way you think they do. You're an asset to them just like Zhang was an asset to you. And assets are expendable. Sarah leaned forward. I can't offer you freedom, but I can offer you dignity. Help us understand the full scope of what Zhang compromised. Give us information that will actually protect soldiers' lives. Do that, and I'll make sure your cooperation is reflected in your sentencing. Do that, and maybe someday you'll get to see your brother's children. Maybe you'll get to have some kind of life beyond prison walls. Li was silent for a long time, staring at the photographs spread across the table. What do you want to know? She finally asked. Over the next 6 hours, Li provided details that would reshape American understanding of Chinese intelligence operations. She revealed networks, methods, and ongoing operations. Most importantly, she identified 3 other embedded operatives in different branches of the military. Ghost watched from the observation room with growing amazement. How did she do that? The FBI agent asked. We've had professional interrogators working on this woman for 2 days. Mitchell didn't interrogate her, Ghost said. She understood her, that's the difference. By the end of the session, Sarah was exhausted but satisfied. They had everything they needed to roll up a significant portion of the Chinese intelligence network in the region. As MPs came to escort Li back to her cell, the woman paused at the door. Colonel Mitchell, thank you for treating me like a person. Sarah nodded. We're all people, Li. Even in this business, we're all just people. After Li was gone, Ghost entered the interrogation room. That was impressive, he said. Also completely unauthorized. The FBI is going to have fits about proper procedure. The FBI can fill out all the paperwork they want. We got what we needed. We got more than that. We dismantled an intelligence network that's been operating for years. Do you know how many soldiers you probably just saved? Sarah gathered the photographs and documents. I was just doing my job, Ghost. No, you went above and beyond like you always do. He paused. The question is, what now? Are you coming back? Because JSOC could use someone with your skills. Hell, 6 agencies would jump at the chance to bring you on. Sarah considered this. A week ago, she'd been content with her quiet retirement. But the last few days had reminded her of something she'd forgotten. She was good at this work. Really good. And there was something satisfying about using those skills to protect people. I don't know, she admitted. Let me think about it. Take all the time you need. But Mitchell, whatever you decide, thank you. You saved lives this week. Never doubt that. That evening, Sarah returned to the training field where this had all started. The NATO exercises were concluding, with a formal ceremony planned for the next day. She found Major Hendricks overseeing the final equipment breakdown. He spotted her and walked over. Colonel Mitchell, I was hopping to see you before the ceremony tomorrow. Major, I've been thinking about what you said, about assumptions and respect, and I've been talking to the soldiers who were here when you first arrived, the ones who laughed. Sarah said nothing, waiting. I want them to understand what they did wrong. But more than that, I want them to understand who you are. With your permission, I'd like to share the details of this operation at tomorrow's ceremony. Let them know that the woman they dismissed is the reason we're not dealing with a major intelligence breach right now. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She'd spent 20 years keeping her work secret. But then she thought about all the other women in the military, the ones who faced dismissal and disrespect every day. On one condition, she said, you make it clear this isn't just about me. This is about every soldier who doesn't look like what people expect. Every woman, every older service member, everyone who's had their abilities questioned because of how they look. Hendricks nodded. I can do that, I should do that. Then yes, you have my permission. They stood together, watching the sunset over the training field. Can I ask you something, Colonel? Hendricks said. Why did you stay quiet about your record? Why let us think you were just some retired desk officer? Sarah smiled slightly. Because people reveal who they really are when they think you're not important. If I'd walked in here with my credentials on display, everyone would have treated me with respect. But it would have been respect for the rank, not for me as a person. This way, I got to see who you all really were. And what did you see? I saw good soldiers who made bad assumptions. I saw a commander who cared more about his authority than about security. And I saw a system that still has a long way to go when it comes to respecting everyone who serves. Hendricks absorbed this. You're right, and I'm going to work on that, starting tomorrow. The ceremony the next day drew over 500 military personnel from 6 NATO countries. The reviewing stand was decorated with flags, and a small band played as soldiers assembled in formation. Sarah sat in the front row of the guest section, wearing her dress uniform with all her medals on display. Next to her sat Ghost, Rodriguez, and several other officers who'd been involved in the operation. Nervous, Ghost asked quietly, should I be? You're about to become famous, at least in military intelligence circles. How does that feel? Sarah considered this. Ask me after it's over. General Marcus Webb, commander of Fort Bragg, took the podium. He was an imposing figure, a career officer with 3 decades of service. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we've gathered today to conclude what has been an exceptional NATO joint training exercise. But we're also here to recognize something extraordinary that occurred during these exercises. He gestured to Hendricks, who stood and approached the podium with a handful of papers. Major Hendricks will brief you on a security operation that most of you are unaware of. Hendricks looked out at the assembled soldiers, many of whom he'd commanded during the exercises. Sarah could see some of the ones who'd laughed at her, who dismissed her as irrelevant. 4 days ago, Hendricks began, a security consultant arrived at our training field. This consultant was a retired lieutenant colonel with no visible unit assignment and no obvious reason for being here. I'll be honest with you, I didn't want her here. I thought she was going to slow us down, get in the way, ask annoying questions. He paused, letting that sink in. I was wrong, very wrong. That consultant identified a Chinese intelligence operative who had been embedded in our communications unit for 3 years. While I was dismissing her concerns, she was building a case. While my soldiers were laughing at her, she was analyzing transmission patterns and behavioral indicators that everyone else had missed. The crowd was silent now, every eye on Hendricks. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a 20-year veteran of military intelligence, caught a spy that our standard security protocols had completely missed. She then coordinated with JSOC to capture not just the operative, but his handler, and in doing so, she dismantled an intelligence network that had been compromising NATO operations for years. He turned to look directly at Sarah. She did this despite being mocked, despite being dismissed, despite having her credentials questioned and her access revoked. She did it because she's a professional who put the mission and the safety of her fellow soldiers above her personal feelings. Hendricks stepped back, and General Webb returned to the podium. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell represents the best of what we aspire to be in the military. She embodies expertise, dedication, and a commitment to protecting those who serve. But she also represents something else, the danger of making assumptions based on appearance rather than capability. He looked out at the assembled soldiers. How many of you saw Colonel Mitchell on this field and assumed she didn't belong here? How many dismissed her because she didn't fit your image of what a soldier should look like? Sarah could see soldiers shifting uncomfortably. Some were looking down, others at each other. Let this be a lesson, Webb continued. The person you underestimate today might be the one who saves your life tomorrow. The soldier who doesn't look like what you expect might be the one with the skills and experience you desperately need. We cannot afford to judge our brothers and sisters in arms by anything other than their character and capabilities. He turned to Sarah. Colonel Mitchell, would you please join me? Sarah stood and walked to the podium, very aware of hundreds of eyes on her. Colonel Mitchell, Webb said formally, on behalf of the United States military and our NATO allies, I want to thank you for your service. Your actions this week have protected countless soldiers and preserved the integrity of our joint operations. He held up a medal case. It is my honor to present you with the Defense Meritorious Service Medal for exceptionally meritorious service in a position of significant responsibility. As he pinned the medal to her uniform, the assembled soldiers began to applaud. It started slowly, then built to a sustained ovation. Sarah stood at attention, accepting the recognition with quiet dignity. When the applause finally died down, Webb gestured for her to speak. Sarah looked out at the sea of faces. She could pick out the ones who'd laughed at her. They looked ashamed now. She could see Hendricks standing with genuine respect in his eyes. She could see Rodriguez, Ghost, and the other officers who'd believed in her. Thank you, General Webb, she began. I accept this honor not just for myself, but for every soldier who has ever been underestimated, for every woman who's had to prove herself twice as hard, for every veteran who returned to service and was treated like they'd forgotten how to do their job, for everyone who's had their capabilities questioned because of their age, their gender, their appearance, or any other factor that has nothing to do with their actual ability to serve. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I spent 20 years in military intelligence, most of it classified. I couldn't talk about what I did, couldn't share my experiences, couldn't explain the skills I'd developed. When people looked at me, they saw a middle-aged woman, probably a desk officer, probably someone who'd never done anything important. And I let them think that because sometimes being underestimated is an advantage. A ripple of quiet laughter went through the crowd. But it shouldn't be that way. We should never have to hide our capabilities or play down our experience to be taken seriously. We should never have to prove ourselves over and over again to people who refuse to see our worth. Her voice grew stronger. So here's my challenge to all of you. Look at the soldier standing next to you. Look at the person you might have dismissed, underestimated, or overlooked, and ask yourself, what am I missing? What could this person teach me? What capabilities am I failing to recognize? She gestured to the assembled multinational force. We are stronger together. We are stronger when we recognize and respect the diverse skills and experiences everyone brings to the mission. We are stronger when we judge each other by our actions and our character, not by our appearance or our assumptions. Sarah stepped back from the podium and saluted General Webb, who returned the salute crisply. The ceremony continued with other recognitions and awards, but Sarah's speech was what people would remember. As soldiers filed out after the ceremony, many approached her to shake her hand or simply to say thank you. A young female lieutenant stopped in front of her, eyes bright. "Colonel Mitchell, I just wanted to say, thank you. I've been dealing with some of the same things you talked about. People assuming I'm not capable because I'm young and female. Your speech meant a lot." Sarah smiled. "What's your specialty, Lieutenant?" "Cyber warfare, ma'am. I'm one of the top-ranked operators in my field, but sometimes it feels like I have to prove it every single day." "Then keep proving it," Sarah said. "Not because you have to, but because excellence is its own reward. And remember, the people who underestimate you are giving you an advantage. Use it." The lieutenant saluted and walked away with her head held higher. Ghost appeared at Sarah's elbow. "So have you made your decision? Are you coming back?" Sarah watched the soldiers dispersing, the multinational force that had come together for these exercises. She thought about Li Mei Chen in her cell, about Zhang facing decades in prison, about the intelligence networks they'd dismantled. "I have a counteroffer," she said. "I don't want to go back to full-time undercover work, but I could consult, review security protocols, train analysts, help identify potential threats. I could work with Master Sergeant Rodriguez on improving our counterintelligence procedures." "Based here at Fort Bragg?" "Based at my house in Fayetteville. I'll come in when needed, but I'm keeping my teaching job at the community college and my work at the Veterans Center. I've built a life there. I'm not giving it up completely." Ghost smiled. "I think we can work with that. JSOC could definitely use someone with your expertise on a consulting basis. And honestly, having you train the next generation of intelligence officers might be even more valuable than having you in the field." "There's one more condition," Sarah added. "What's that?" "I want to work with soldiers who have been overlooked or underestimated. The older veterans who still have skills to offer. The women who are constantly having to prove themselves. The people who don't fit the traditional mold but have valuable capabilities. I want to help them be recognized for what they can actually do." "Done," Ghost said immediately. "In fact, I know several people who would jump at the chance to work with you. This could become a real program." Over the next few weeks, word of what had happened at Fort Bragg spread through military intelligence communities. Sarah received calls from officers across different branches, asking for her input on security reviews, her assessment of personnel, her training expertise. Major Hendricks kept his promise. He instituted new protocols for his unit, focused on recognizing capability over appearance, and personally mentored several female soldiers who'd been struggling with respect issues. Master Sergeant Rodriguez became Sarah's primary partner in developing counterintelligence training programs. Together, they created courses that emphasized behavioral analysis, pattern recognition, and the importance of taking every security concern seriously, regardless of who raised it. 3 months after the NATO exercises, Sarah stood in front of a classroom at Fort Bragg's intelligence school. 20 students sat before her, a mix of ages, genders, and backgrounds. These were soldiers who'd been recommended for advanced intelligence training, but had faced barriers or skepticism about their abilities. "Welcome," Sarah began. "Over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to teach you everything I learned in 20 years of military intelligence operations. But more importantly, I'm going to teach you how to use the fact that people will underestimate you." She smiled at their curious faces. "Some of you are older than the average intelligence officer. Some of you are women in a field still dominated by men. Some of you don't fit the Hollywood image of what a spy should look like. And that, believe it or not, is your greatest advantage." A hand went up, a female sergeant in her late 30s. "Ma'am, how do we balance using that advantage with demanding the respect we deserve?" "Excellent question," Sarah said. "The answer is, you don't have to choose. You can be underestimated in the field, where it helps you do your job, while demanding full respect from your colleagues and command structure. The key is knowing when to reveal your capabilities and when to keep them hidden." She pulled up a slide showing a photo from the NATO exercises, her standing alone at the edge of the training field, watching through binoculars while soldiers laughed in the background. This is me, 4 months ago. Everyone in this photo thought I was irrelevant, and that's exactly what allowed me to observe and identify a Chinese intelligence operative they'd all missed. She clicked to the next slide, her receiving the medal from General Webb. This is me 2 days later. Same person, same skills, but now everyone could see what I was actually capable of. What changed? Not me. What changed was their willingness to look past their assumptions. Over the following weeks, Sarah taught her students advanced tradecraft, but also something more important, confidence in their own abilities despite others' skepticism. She taught them to trust their instincts, to speak up when they saw something wrong, and to never let dismissal stop them from doing their jobs. The program was so successful that JSOC decided to expand it, creating a permanent training track focused on maximizing the potential of non-traditional intelligence officers. 6 months after the NATO exercises, Sarah received a letter. It was from Li Mei Chen, now serving her sentence in a federal prison. The letter was brief. Colonel Mitchell, I think about our conversation often. You were right. I was an asset, not a person, to the people I served. But you treated me as a person, even as your enemy. That meant something. I've been cooperating fully with intelligence debriefings. It won't earn me freedom. But perhaps it will save some lives. That has to be enough. There is a dignity in doing the right thing, even when it costs us everything. You taught me that. Thank you. Li Mei Chen. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with other mementos from her career. Then she returned to grading papers from her history students at the community college. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rodriguez. New security concern at Bennying. Could use your eyes on it. Available. Sarah smiled and typed back, on my way. She grabbed her jacket and headed out the door. Her retirement hadn't ended. It had just evolved into something more flexible, more on her own terms. She was no longer the unknown woman being laughed at on a training field. She was Colonel Sarah Mitchell, recognized expert in counterintelligence, trainer of the next generation, and someone who'd proven that the most dangerous people are often the ones nobody sees coming. As she drove toward Fort Bennying, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. Not just for her, but for the soldiers she'd trained, the protocols that had been updated, the attitudes that had slowly begun to shift. There was still work to do. There would always be people who made assumptions, who underestimated based on appearance rather than capability. But now there were also more people who knew better, who'd learned to look deeper, to respect experience and expertise regardless of how it was packaged. Sarah had spent 20 years in the shadows, her accomplishments classified and unknown. Now, in what she'd thought would be retirement, she'd found a new mission, not just catching spies, but changing minds and proving that wisdom, experience, and capability didn't have age limits or gender requirements. The mockery from that first day at the NATO exercises seemed like a lifetime ago. Those soldiers who'd laughed had learned a valuable lesson. Some of them now served as advocates in their own units, speaking up when they saw others being dismissed or underestimated. Major Hendricks had become one of her strongest supporters, regularly requesting her input on security matters and recommending her program to other commanders. Even General Webb had become an ally, championing programs that recognized and utilized experienced veterans, regardless of age or traditional career paths. As Sarah pulled into Fort Bennying, her phone rang. It was Ghost. Mitchell, I've got a situation. Remember how you said you wanted to work with overlooked soldiers? I've got 3 candidates who have been repeatedly passed over for advancement despite excellent performance records. All women, all over 35, all being told they're not the right fit for intelligence work. Sarah smiled, Send me their files, I'll meet with them next week. You're building quite a reputation, you know. People are calling you the champion of underestimated soldiers. Good, Sarah said. Maybe it'll make some commanders think twice before dismissing someone because they don't fit a preconceived image. It already is, Ghost said. You've started something important here, Mitchell, a real cultural shift. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her car for a moment, looking at the base entrance. She thought about all the soldiers inside, the young ones still proving themselves, the experienced ones fighting for recognition, the women navigating a system that still sometimes doubted their capabilities. She thought about her younger self, the woman who'd entered military intelligence decades ago and fought for every bit of respect she earned. She thought about all the times she'd been doubted, dismissed, underestimated. And she thought about how satisfying it was to prove them all wrong. Sarah got out of her car and headed into the base, ready to see what security concern had brought her here, ready to train more soldiers, ready to continue the work of changing hearts and minds.